And we're going to get into it right away. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Mr. Lee Ritenour. Thank you, coffee.
I'm ready.
Ready to go.
Everybody.
You got his coffee. Hey, so listen. First of all, you know, this is a smooth jazz cruise. But for me and Lee Ritenour, that term smooth jazz is a new term. Because when Lee Ritenour started doing his thing, making his own records, they didn't have the term smooth jazz. It was, sometimes they called it contemporary jazz. They had different names for it, but it wasn't smooth jazz. There were smooth elements to it, but there were rough elements. It was just music.
That's right.
And I want to, so we're going to get into that, but first, Lee, what you all don't know, or may not know, is that Lee Ritenour, before he made his first record, he was a studio cat. Give me a rough estimate as to how many recordings you were on.
Oh, wow. Well, there was a Japanese fan one year that sent me a list, and it was about 3,000 recordings, mostly records, movies, TVs, and all sorts of stuff.
So 3,000 recordings before he made his first record as Lee Ritenour. Right? See, that's why I hate doing stuff with Lee Ritenour, because I'm on like 1,000. That usually impresses people. But not around here, not around Lee Ritenour. But Lee, tell me, what kind of stuff were you doing before you made your first Lee Ritenour album? Give us an example. Give us a sample of a typical day in the life of Lee Ritenour in Los Angeles before you started making records.
Well, in those days you could drive and get somewhere in LA. You couldn't do that now, what we used to do then, which was about 3 sessions a day, all in different studios. So you'd go from Hollywood to the West Side, to the Valley, and then in the evening back somewhere else. Sometimes 3 or 4 sessions a day. We would average 12, 15 sessions a week. And it would, you know, sometimes it was dog food commercials, and, you know, those paid, you know, dividends too, so that was good. But
diaper commercials, McDonald's, Ford trucks.
That's right. But then, you know, we were doing records, working a lot for Quincy Jones and all the rock producers and the pop and R&B. Motown had just in the early 70s moved from Detroit to Los Angeles, and they set up their shop. So I was on a lot of Motown sessions, and then we were doing Barry White sessions, and that would be a typical day. And Quincy would always call. He had this thing where he'd feel like he wanted to do something with somebody on one of his records or projects, and he'd call the day before or the night before, and he'd say, "Ritenour, what you doing tomorrow?" And I said, "I'm sorry, Q, I'm booked all day." "Well, what are you doing at midnight?" I said, I'm cool. Well, we said, "Come on down then." And then we'd overdub till 3 in the morning, and I'd start at 8 or 9 on the movie date the next day.
Bleary-eyed.
Yeah.
How old were you when you first started doing the sessions?
Well, you know, my buddy, who you'll be talking to later this week, and you guys will see, Dave Gruisin, he got me in doing all the movie dates when I was 19. I met him through Sergio Mendes. I had hooked up with Sergio Mendes in Brazil '66 doing Sergio's records, and Dave was good friends with Sergio. I met Dave. Harvey Mason was playing drums with me then. Harvey invited Gruisin to come down to the Baked Potato, this little club that's still there. And we started playing Tuesday nights, and then Dave started hiring me for his movie. So I went from kind of 1 session a week to 15 almost overnight because of Gruisin, because he was so well respected in the movie industry. And it's like, well, who's this kid that this guy's using? He must be okay. And that's how that happened.
So in addition to the 3 or 4 recording sessions that you do during the day, you would lots of times end up at the Baked Potato at night to really kind of jam and do what you felt like doing what you were enjoying.
Absolutely, every Tuesday night for 5 years, and everybody would. And it was the beginning of what you guys know as smooth jazz, but you know what Marcus and I were calling contemporary jazz, elements of fusion, elements of pop, R&B, Brazilian music, and that became all some variation of kind of what they call smooth now. And so we would, and it was Dave and me, but when Dave couldn't make it, it was Patrice Rushen, it was Harvey Mason, it was Anthony Jackson, it was Abraham Laboriel, it was Ernie Watts, it was quite a who's who.
These were the top cats in LA in that era, and the Baked Potato was a little hole in the wall. seated maybe what, 75 people? Lee?
Yeah, 75, 80 people.
75, 80 people, and they actually sold baked potatoes, by the way.
And they still do, because my son Wes, who's playing drums with me this week, has his band playing at the Baked Potato now. You know?
So it's kind of like with the Proving Ground in LA. I stopped by there a couple times. I'm from the East Coast, but I would stop by, and every time I came to LA, I had to stop by the Baked Potato. I came with Joe Sample. He introduced me.
Joe hung out there all the time.
They said Al Jarreau used to come and listen to you cats play at the Baked Potato also, right?
Al Jarreau, we were working so early. Al Jarreau was playing down the street at another club called the Blah Blah Cafe. This was before he was signed to Warner Brothers. Al was on his entire career on Warner's, and he hadn't made his first year record yet, and he'd come by, he'd sit on this little row of seats on the side, and we had a percussionist with us, and he would take some of that percussion, and he'd start playing, then we gave him a mic, and he'd start playing, singing his percussion parts. And so he was kind of like the fifth Beatle.
Yeah, but you get the feeling that Al was putting his thing together, listening to you guys, being inspired by you guys, right?
Well, it was all mutual. You know who would sometimes come down? I mean, every once in a while, Clapton would come in, Jeff Beck would come in, all the studio guys would come in, and plus just a great audience in general. But one guy that I always found odd that he came in quite often and sat in the corner by himself was Bob Dylan. So Dylan would come in, and later, Dylan asked me to work with him on a recording, and I said, well, why do you come down to the Baked Potato? It doesn't seem like your stuff, He said, well, you play guitar, I play guitar,
There's a commonality right there. Well, tell me some of the unusual sessions that you found yourself on. Sessions that people wouldn't expect that you would have been on.
Well, I guess the one that most surprises people is Pink Floyd's The Wall. And
Wait a minute, stop. Don't you just naming that and then continuing on. That is legendary record. I told people about Pink Floyd and The Wall. That's the record, y'all, that is like the top 5 seller every year since it came out. Like the parents hand that record down to their kids, and they hand it down to their kids. So it's been a classic record since it was recorded around what year?
Late 70s, I think.
Late 70s.
Early 80s, something like that.
You're on The Wall.
Yeah, 4 cuts. But the funniest story is when I walked in, and of course David Gilmour was in the band there. It was the original band, and they were working, I worked with Steely Dan and I worked with the Bee Gees, and those were 2 groups that took a long, long time to make a record.
Right.
But nothing compared to Pink Floyd.
Oh, they took their time, huh?
Oh man, 3 years to make one record. Yeah.
So what was it? Is it that they would perform the same music over and over again, trying to get it better, or would they play new songs and discard the old songs?
No, they were crafting each tune. They would decide on those 10 or 12 tunes, and maybe it'd end up, I forget on The Wall how many tunes it is, but probably 8 or 9 maybe. And so they would just craft those tunes over and over. So one example, when I walked in, we used to have this big crate of instruments that we'd walk in. I'd bring in 15 guitars and all these pedal boards and all these amps, and I thought, I'm going to impress these guys. I'm coming in with all my A stuff, And I came in, and Gilmour's got the room lined up with every vintage guitar, every vintage pedal, every vintage amp. The whole studio was about the size of this room.
Wow.
Was full of his stuff.
Wow.
I didn't feel so impressive after that. But anyway, they asked me, they said, we're working on this solo, and we don't want you to play the solo, but Dave is going to play the solo. But he said, we can't figure out how to get out of it. And I said, we're going to get out of it. It's like how to end the solo, because they're overdubbing. They're crafting this solo. And I heard that they worked on this solo for about 3 months.
Okay, now you guys know in jazz, you play a solo, it takes about, 2 minutes and you're solo's over. But in rock, in pop music, you're overdubbing. So the track has been recorded, now you're going to add your solo, and that allows you to do take after take after take and figure out the exact notes. So you're saying that he worked on that one solo for 3 months.
That's what I heard.
And they got the whole solo, but they couldn't figure out how to end the solo.
Well, they were unbelievably patient about every note on the record was like writing a song. So they would craft every note. And so they would have to sign off on every little thing, So even the rhythm part I played on one of the tunes on acoustic guitar, that took 2.5 days.
Wow.
So, but anyway, so they said, well, Lee, would you play the end of the solo and give us some ideas?
Right.
We won't use your solo. We just want to have some fresh ideas.
That's against the music rule. That's definitely against jazz rules. That's like a rapper saying, hey man, can you rap about when you almost got shot? and then I'm going to say it. Right?
Kind of, yeah.
So what happened?
But, I said, I said, sure, so I got out and I sort of matched Gilmore's sound, and the first 3/4 of the solo I listened to it, and I listened to it a couple times, and then I recorded about 4 or 5 passes, and just the last 4 bars or so, and they said, that's great, Lee, thanks, and we'll move on now. And so that was that, and then 2 years later, when the record finally came out, I went and got the record, or they sent it to me. And I was real curious about that solo, and he was saying, and it was Gilmore. It was definitely Gilmore, but the last 4 bars was my ending.
Wow, that's awesome. So, who were you in the car with when you heard that? Because I'm sure you had to let somebody know. Listen, that's my stuff, right?
Yeah.
Well,
that back in those days, that's the other part of the story. I'm just spacing out on the producer's name, Robert. He was a great producer, and we had worked on some other stuff, and we knew each other. And he called me for the session initially, and he said, Lee, so you want to work on the Pink Floyd record? I said, yeah, sure, of course. And he said, well, okay, I got to tell you one thing. Now, this was before CDs. This is just vinyl.
Yeah.
And so he said, I got to tell you something, Lee. He said, because it's a band thing, and there's going to be a few other people on the record, a couple background singers, but we probably won't list your name. And I said, that's okay, will I get paid? He said, oh no, you're going to get paid very well. And he said, I'm good. I'm good. And then later when the CD came out, they listed everybody's name.
Oh, did they put your name?
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, you're Lee Ritenour. We know his sound, but he can play basically in any style that you want him to play in. And I'm not just saying that. I mean, he can do the Wes Montgomery thing. He can play like a rhythm guitar player. He can play like blues. He can play like Chicago blues, Mississippi blues, Connecticut blues.
Well, there's one reason I grew up in Los Angeles at an incredible time when there was legends in every guitar field. Of course, in the jazz, there was Wes Montgomery, there was Kenny Burrell, there was Jim Hall, there was Howard Roberts, there was Gabor Zappo, there was just all these incredible guitar players. And then in the blues, B.B. King was at the top of his game, Albert King, Johnny Hooker was still alive, all these great blues guys. In the country, there was Chet Atkins. In the rock, there was Hendrix and Clapton, Jeff Beck. Every field had, in the classical, there was Segovia, and the flamenco, Sabicas. Every field had an incredible guitarist.
It was the glory years for the guitar.
Oh man, and I was checking everybody out. Mm-hmm. Anybody that could play, let me hear him.
Well, so you ended up not doing that kind of thing just for Pink Floyd. I mean, Ghost Writers. I mean, Lee Ritenour was a ghost guitar player. I personally know, I'm not going to call out any of my friends whose guitar parts have been replaced by Lee Ritenour, but it's a long list.
Well, the George Benson story is a pretty common record now. That's a good one.
Okay, so, I can tell that one? Okay, y'all know Give It a Night, right? And you know how it starts. Those 2 guitar notes. George Benson couldn't get it the way he wanted it. And he did like Quincy, Lee Ritenour, can you come right now to the studio and play this for me? Right?
Well, that's true. And there was that, and we kind of called it a rhythm part at that point. And then later, where the story ends is even better. George had gotten, Quincy did an amazing record, and George was at the height of his career right then and playing his butt off,
Yeah.
And so Quincy originally hired me to kind of play rhythm on the record, but also give George kind of a more updated sound.
To work on George's sound, make it more contemporary.
Yeah, add some effects, just little subtle things, just
Right.
to kind of freshen him up a little bit. And George was all into that. So at the end of the album, George had a house in Hawaii. He had gone back to Hawaii, and Quincy's mixing the record. and it's still tape in those days. And apparently the second engineer erased part of George's solo on the end of Give Me a Night.
So wait, so it's not just those two notes?
That's right. Scandalous. That's scandalous, you know. So I get a call. Now there's no cell phones in those days. This is a regular phone. So I get a call. It's like 2 in the morning. I'm sleeping, and it says, "Ritenour, hello? It's Quincy, man. You got to come down here right now. We got a problem." And apparently the mixes and the record was due to be out on the street in like a couple of weeks.
So there was a big deadline.
Yeah, big deadline. And he said, the second engineer screwed up. He erased part of George's solo. Man, we're freaking out here. We got to come down. I said, what do you want me to replace George's solo? I can't do that.
Wow.
Yeah, and he said, no, just a part of it. He just erased about 4. Here comes the 4 bars again.
Yeah. What record is it? Is it Give Me the Night?
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm downloading that song again. I'll be like, no,
there it is. So the thing is, I had set up George's equipment, his amps, the sound effects, the pedals and everything. So everything, I said, but Q, I said, is everything still on? He said, yeah, man, all this stuff is here. You just got to plug in. It's easy.
Wow.
So I went down like 3 in the morning, blurry out. They had a cassette that they had done a rough mix on for George or something.
Right.
And they played me the cassette over and over and over until I learned the end of
So you had to
George's
learn. So you felt like you were a teenager learning people's solos.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And but it was fun.
That's
and,
awesome.
And then Quincy said, "Let's not tell George right now." So so it took about 10 years, and then George and I were walking in the airport. I figured, what the hell, you know? And I knew how George was. He was just happy the record was so successful.
Right.
He didn't know?
He didn't know that until then. And so then if we were walking, George, let me tell you the story what happened when you went back to Hawaii that night. And he just laughed his ass off.
So, okay, so we're in like, Lee, we're like 1977 in that area. When did you, first of all, what made you decide that, you know what, you were obviously a very successful studio musician and you could have just rode that wave for a long time, but you decided to start making your own records. What was the thinking in terms of deciding that you wanted to go in the studio on your own?
Well, it was, for me, it was pretty simple because as much as it's great to work on all these incredible records and stuff, a lot of times you're doing TV shows, you're doing movie dates, and they're not definitely the quality always of Dave Gruisin or John Williams or some of those people. And a lot of the stuff was not that fun, you know, after a while. And so it was, you're always part of the puzzle, you're a piece of the pie when you're a studio guy. And so I wanted to be the whole pie. I wanted to produce like Marcus, I wanted to write the songs, I wanted to, you know, put my sound on the whole record. So fortunately I got signed by Epic Records when I was 23, and then I was still riding out the studio career, but by the time I was about 27, and I got signed to Elektra, that was really my first big deal. I said, okay, I gotta concentrate on this, because other young fellows my age, like John Scofield at the time, Pat Metheny, others were already going out on the road, hitting it heavy, and I didn't have time because I was still in the studios, you know.
So they were making names for themselves as artists.
Yeah.
And you were like, hey, no, I got to do the same thing.
Yeah. So then I started devoting full time to it, and you know, obviously it's paid off for a whole career. 45 albums later.
What was the first record?
First Course, and
First
right before Captain Fingers.
Right. So the second album was Captain Fingers, because that was the one. Tell me if I'm wrong, but that feels like that was your breakout album.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Captain Fingers. Every musician, you know, we called it fusion back then, and every fusion musician had to learn Captain Fingers. Did you have trouble finding your artist's voice? And what I mean is, when you're a sideman for that long, as I was, the trouble I had was figuring out, you know, because I could play on this date and I play a certain way with this artist, I play a certain way with this artist, and after a while, I had like 6 or 7 styles going.
That's right.
And then when it was time to make my album, I said, well, which one of these styles is actually me? Or how am I going to create my own voice as an artist? Did you run into the same?
100%, but there's an interesting after story to that. The first album, I felt completely like that, like, wow, I'm the main guy now, I'm the voice. And so, do I have my Lee Ritenour style, you know? And so I kind of went through the whole record with that over my head and not feeling confident about it. And then, other players like Harvey Mason and Steve Gadd and Tom Scott were walking through the session that I had invited to play with me. And I remember Tom Scott saying, "Oh, it's your date now. What you gonna do?" You know, he was giving me
putting the pressure on you. Yeah, sure.
And so for years and years, I couldn't listen to that first album. I felt like I did not have my style. The funny thing is, maybe I went back 15 years later and finally listened to the first record. I said, Jesus, I sounded like me and I didn't realize it.
Right.
I'm sure the same thing happened to you.
Absolutely. I was searching for my style, and it was there all along.
Yeah.
Right? Especially when you're not thinking about trying to find a style. The worst thing you can do in finding your own style is look for it. You know, usually it's right there in front of you, like looking in the mirror.
That's right.
But, you know, you go, well, that's not special. That's just me in the mirror.
Yeah.
But that's really who you are, and that's really what you have to develop.
See, everybody in this room has their style, because when you call somebody on the phone and they know you a little bit, you don't have to say your name.
Right.
You know, they know you. You know, so
Right.
that thing is inside of you. So as far as musicians, it's just a matter of getting it out.
And who were the guitar players in your early years, when you're 24, 25, 6, 7, who really had styles that you said, you know, I need to make sure I have a voice as strong as that?
Well, when I was 12, just starting to study, and I first got hooked on Wes Montgomery.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the number one guy there, and of course he's ended up being the jazz guitar legend still today. But you know, I grew up in an era that had Joe Pass, and I studied with Joe. I studied with Barney Kessel. I studied. I'd go down to the Lighthouse in Hermosa Beach with my dad, and hear Wes Montgomery, and met Wes, and then the contemporary guys that were coming up the same time as me was another studio buddy, Larry Carlton. So Larry and I were coming up almost the same time. And then on the East Coast was Schofield and Pat Metheny, and then Al Dimiola.
Right.
And so there was a whole bunch of us coming up about the same age group.
What about your co-musicians? Because you ended up really having a family. We've heard Lee mention Harvey Mason's name a number of times now. Of course, Dave Gruisin, Abe Laboriel. Yeah, feels like that. He was very important to you. What's the advantage of working with the same guys over and over again? What do you get from that?
Well, the amazing thing is that we've met a lot of these people. This guy, Dave and I were talking about him the other day, because he goes back to his teenage crew, and they all ended up being heavy professionals, which we can talk about that too. But in my case, the pianist Patrice Rushen, I met Patrice when she was 14, I was 16. And Dugu, who passed away, the great drummer that played with Quincy and Michael Jackson and Hendrix and all these people. And Dugu was around the same age. I met all the Toto guys, Steve Lukather, David Page. We were all teenagers. So, and we were playing casuals together. Casuals are parties, you know, like we play on the Queen Mary boat, you know, at somebody's wedding.
You guys were playing weddings?
Oh yeah, of course we were. But I was 12, 13, 14, 15.
Did you ever play Hava Nagila?
Of course I did.
Hey, I'm only asking because I know I played that stuff. But Leah, you know I put some funk on it, man. I think I got fired from that gig. So, but these guys, it wasn't just like you hiring them, right? I mean, you guys were really a family. They brought stuff to your music.
Oh yeah, no, and I met Ernie Wass, the great saxophone player, when we were both about 19 or 20 doing sessions together. And we said, man, you play nice. You come down to the Baked Potato, because the Baked Potato was that club where everybody ended up being home, you know, Central, Grand Central Station.
Sure.
And so, of course, Dave, and then later with Harvey, actually earlier on with Harvey Mason on drums, and then Anthony Jackson came out to LA, he's a great bassist, Abraham Labora, as we said. So there was just an incredible crew of people. Eric Parental was on this cruise. I met Eric very early on, you know. Most of these guys, some of them I knew since the time we were teenagers, and if not, you know, I met this guy when he was 19.
Yeah. I had braces on. I literally had braces on the first time I played with Lee Ritenour.
That's right. So tomorrow we're playing together, and we're going to dig out a tune that, I don't know, we've probably played it since the session, but we haven't played it in about, I don't know, 30 years, Real Funk.
Oh, Real Funk, oh yeah. Hey man, let me tell you, Lee Ritenour comes off as a nice guy, doesn't he? But let me tell you something. I'm 19, man. Lee had come to the East Coast to do a recording, with Dave Gruisin, who was producing, I believe, or co-producing.
Yeah.
And Dave said, I got this kid they basically should check out. So I'm playing, and it's time for my solo, right? So I'm playing my solo, and Lee is talking shit to me during my solo on his microphone. Oh, you playing triplets now, huh? Come on, man, build it, come on. You remember that? Hell yeah, I remember that. Don't let me fool you, man. I'm like, just ignore him, man. Play, get through the solo, just ignore him. But it was a great day, it was a great experience.
To that day, that solo's a classic, you know?
Yeah, and I'm surprised, man, these kids who are 14, 15 in Europe and Africa, in South Africa, you know, man, the solo from Rio Funk. I go, man, I don't even remember. All I remember was Lee talking shit. Tell me about that, Lee. Like, music goes so far. You have to have been surprised when you started traveling by people who knew every note on your album, people whose lives were changed by your music. That has to have blown your mind, right?
It's one of the most touching things, you know, and that's what brings the world closer together when you're a musician, because some of us are lucky enough to travel quite a few places, and so I don't know about you, Marcus, but still almost every year I travel someplace that I've never been before. You know,
it's a big world, yeah.
Yeah, and my son Wes, who's a big geography nut, you know, it's like he's really, I can bust him, you know. It's like, so we got called to play in Gabon, Africa, you know, and he knew all about Gabon. I said, how do you know about that, you know? And then we got called to play in Kazakhstan. He said, Astana? I said, yeah, I don't know, I guess so.
That's right. So I'll tell you, man, we played in Kazakhstan at that festival last year. Man, I couldn't have told you where it was. All I know is it's far because we were on a plane for a long time. But it's an amazing city. It's very new, the city, right? It's like on a, what do they call them, a steppe, which is a flat piece of land. It's raised, but it's flat. And they built this city on the steppe, and every building is brand new, and all these geometrical shapes, you know, those kind of Jetsons looking cities.
Yeah,
one of those.
Las Vegas on steroids.
Exactly. And we started playing, and they knew every note. It was crazy.
Yeah.
It's a place that, you know, the only thing we knew about Kazakhstan is that's where Borat came from.
That's right. But you can't mention his name there because
that'll piss him off.
Yeah, because he gave that place a bad name, you know, on the movie.
Yeah, so where's Borat? That'll make him mad. So Wes, your son, how old is Wes now?
He's 25.
He's 25. He's been playing with you for how long?
Well, he first debuted with me out at Catalina Island when he was about 16, but seriously, he's been playing since he's about 19, doing everything. He was very cool. He said in that, because every year I had such luck to play with great drummers, so I had some of the best drummers in the world playing with me, and he did not want to, even though I was inviting him already, he said, no, not yet.
So, is it easier for him, or was it easier for him, or harder for him, playing with you, being your son?
It was a pretty natural thing, you know. He's not shy at all now, and so
right.
It's like, Wes, can you play a shorter solo, please? But he's one of the cats now. He's got his friends, he's got his band. He's playing at the Baked Potato, the same club that I played in when I was his age. And to see my poster behind his head on the wall, it's like, oh, wow. That's awesome.
And the other thing that's really unique about you, and I want you to tell me if it helped you, is your studio career. You know, studio musicians, we really have to pay attention to our sound. You know, like you go and you play on a record that's based on 50s music, you have to get that twangly sound from that era. Or if you play on a 70s Barry White record, you have to have a certain sound. And you can get just about any sound, but you and your gear, your equipment, you really are a master at all of that. And there are a lot of guitar players who didn't come that route, you know what I mean, who just picked up the guitar and they had like one foot pedal, you know what I mean? So did your knowledge of your sounds, did that really affect your playing and the songs that you wrote and your career as a solo artist?
I think so. You know, at the end of the story, though, it's still in the hands.
Right.
And so the fact that I concentrated on learning how to play jazz when I was young, but I loved rock, loved blues, and then was also studying classical guitar. And that was the way I really got a big tone out of the guitar. But then I was also a geek, so I ended up loving all the pedals, because the pedals were just coming into vogue in the 70s. And Gruisin would hire me because I could read well and play with the orchestra and play all the parts, but then also I had all the colors, you know, and he was doing these contemporary scores in those days that needed, you know, if it was 3 Days of the Condor or some movie that needed some funky part, you know, we could add to that.
Well, you're going to see when Lee plays, when is the show? Is it tomorrow night?
The 12th.
Tomorrow night, when you see Lee, you're going to see him doing like a little ballet dance with his pedals. And I'm telling you, he's a master, you know what I mean? And whenever I play them, I just write down every pedal he has. Not that's going to help. Dave Gruisin, okay, you've mentioned him a few times, and it seems like he was really instrumental in getting you started. For me, it was Ralph McDonald.
Ah, that's right.
He decided to start mentioning my name in New York, and within 2 months, I was working, you know, all day, all night. It seems like it was like that for you with Dave Gruisin.
Yeah, very much so. Like I mentioned earlier, I had, through another Brazilian guitarist that we became friends, Oscar Castro Neves, I met Sergio Mendes, and then started recording on a couple of Sergio's records. And Sergio had a party at his house in, what was it called, in Encino, out in the valley in Los Angeles. And Sergio was also one of these guys that invited a lot of young people to work with him, and kind of nurtured that a little bit. But he also had all the Brazilians, and so there was a party. So we went to the party, and it was like I think I was 19, and there was a big jam session. Sergio had a separate studio in the back of the property, and so there was a jam session. The incredible Antonio Carlos Jobim, who wrote every famous Brazilian song you ever heard, was there, and that was like, you know, then Dave Gruisin was there, Jerry Mulligan was there, and then the whole band was, Sergio's band was there, so there was a big jam session, and then Antonio Carlos Jobim sat down at the piano and he said, I just wrote a new song, and so he started children's games, and you know, just another one of his classics. He said, what do you guys think? You know, it was like this classic tune that had just been written, you know. So yeah, it was. But then Dave really kind of grabbed onto me, and we started doing his movie sessions, and then he was producing a lot of records as well, and doing his TV. He was doing Mod, and you know,
Maud?
yeah, and all these
I'm
TV.
too young to know about that stuff, but I heard about it on YouTube.
He was doing all these TV shows, so we were working a lot. Then we got him to come down to the Baked Potato and start playing with us. So you know, this has been on my lifetime buddy for all these years. You know, and he mentioned that he first started hearing about your crew when you were about 16.
Well, when I was probably 17, we had a club up in Harlem. It was called the Breezin' Lounge, and
right.
Coincidentally, it was owned by George Benson. You know how George had that album Breezin'? Well, he brought this hole-in-the-wall club uptown 145th and Broadway, and he made it available to all the young cats.
Wow.
So it was a little dangerous to get into the club. But once you were in there, it was a pretty safe haven, and we got to do our thing. Anyway, I think either Dave or his partner Larry Rosen came up to the club because they had heard about these young cats. And they came up to hear us, and our leader was Tom Brown, who was the record player. And Tom ended up being signed by Dave and Larry. So they booked the first session, and Tom walks in there with 7 more of us, right? And none of us are older than 19, you know. Bernard Wright was 14, I was 16 or 17, and they're like, this isn't kindergarten, you know, this is like supposed to be a professional record day, you know? But we were all very, very much into music, and all those cats were talented, and Dave ended up signing Donald Blackman to his label. He ended up signing Bobby Broom, the guitar player. He signed Bernard Wright. I mean, that was like a nice little feeding pool for GRP for a little while.
That's right.
These guys were all very, very talented. But I didn't get a record deal, but for me it was better because Dave just started calling me like he called you.
That's right. I think you worked on Mountain Dance.
I worked on Mountain Dance.
You were 18, right?
Yeah, you guys know Mountain Dance.
Oh,
If you don't know it, you've heard
yes,
it.
oh yes.
Are we playing that tomorrow? Yeah? Okay, good. I better practice it. But he's such an incredible musician, and we're going to get to talk to Dave later on in the week, so I don't want to go too much into what he's done, but he's just a really inspiring musician because, you know, he just doesn't do one thing. He uses all of his talents. You know, he doesn't kind of narrow himself. You know, some people go, I'm not a composer, I'm a player. You know what I mean? Other people say, I'm just a composer, you know. But for Dave, it's like, I do everything. I do movies, I do commercials, I make hit records, you know. Can you imagine, Dave, we were all recording Jamaica Funk, right? Which is hardcore funk. We went to #1 on the R&B charts. Where's Dave from? Is he from Montana or from Colorado?
Yeah, Colorado, from the Rockies.
He's from the Rockies. What the hell is he doing with us on Jamaica Funk? But he sat down at that piano and he put it on him. He put it on him, man. Like the drummer, he said, "Whoa, let me get a little bit more funky because they Colorado, man, just put it down." You know.
And he had me later overdub on that track.
Yeah. No, did you play on Jamaica Funk?
Later, yeah, I overdubbed that.
See? I'm going back and telling my boys. Hey, man, you think that was you on guitar, don't you? But you know, there's so much talent and he's so inspirational. Okay, so hopefully this isn't too much for me to ask you, but I think it's really important for people to know about your home in Malibu. You know what I mean? Because you guys know about those fires in LA. So you tell them what happened.
Well, we were part of that, the Woolsey fire that stretched all the way from the valley to the beach. And I had a home in Malibu for 40 years. And we rebuilt it in the 90s. And then just last year, I had my studio in the city. And then my wife and I decided to put everything back in the Malibu house fire. So I built a brand new studio. We sold our little places in the city and moved everything back to Malibu. And a year later, man, that fire came through, and now one of our houses, our house was one of the ones that was lost. And, I got out with 6 guitars out of about 100, and all the studio was gone and everything, and you know, just that was quite a month, you know.
I can't imagine. What was the warning that you all got?
Well, some people said that there was somewhat of a warning the night before in the news, but we didn't hear it. So the next morning, on a Friday morning, we heard around 8:30 in the morning that they were evacuating all of Malibu. So us old timers, which I was considered one, because I was
40 years,
yeah, lucky enough to buy the first house, which was a brand new house back then, when I was 27.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the one good investment I did.
Right.
Somebody said, "Oh, you weren't partying. You actually did something smart. You actually bought a house."
Right.
But anyway, so us being, you know, the old timers, and there had never been a fire on Point Dume. It had never crossed what's called Pacific Coast Highway, and there was also a fire station on the corner of the point. There was a part of us that, even though it was getting smoky and seemed like it was more serious, and of course times are different these days, and it's drier, the humidity is lower because the marine layer from the ocean there's a bunch of plastic in the ocean and it's keeping it, you know, the marine thing's not coming up.
All that stuff is real.
It's real, and it's the lower humidity. So, but you know, you're there, you're thinking, we'll be back tomorrow, you know. So we packed up and got out, and we had kind of hung out at the beach most of the day, kind of thinking that maybe it would not come or it would pass. But it came time to go, so we split. And a guy from NBC News, when my house was on fire and it was fully inflamed, he took not knowing it was my house, his truck was in front of the house, and they took a film of it and put it on Twitter. So about 6:30 at night, my son Wes was in town, and our assistant called, and they were both freaked out because they had seen the film, and they didn't want to send it to us. I said, "Let's send it," you know. And so that was the way we found out. But yeah, it was.
How many times over the 40 years that you've been living in Malibu, there have been fires, numerous fires, right? So it's not like you were saying, "Hey, man, this thing is serious." Many times you end up going back home, like you said, the next day, after a warning like that. Right?
There had only been one other time that the fire had kind of come up sideways from what's called Paradise Cove, and that's also on the coast side, and it creeped up to Point Dume, but you know they caught it, and but you know it's at different times. You know it's drier out there, and every year, you know, is the biggest fire, then the next year it's a bigger one, you know.
Right.
So and
It's not an aberration, right?
no, it's I guess it's all over the country for that matter, you know. So
Well, man, we're praying for you, man, that you can rebuild.
we're gonna rebuild.
I got a guitar in my basement. I can.
Probably pretty funky.
Yeah, funky, yeah.
In the good way.
In a good way. I want to take some questions if you guys have questions. Just so you know, this guy is probably one of the most influential guitarists in the music that we know now today as smooth jazz. So anybody you hear today has been influenced by this guy. That's why we're so proud to have him on the ship playing for you. Okay, so questions. We'll start with this gentleman right here.
What's your thinking on the state of the art of reproducing music nowadays? The downloading, all of the the free stuff that people get as opposed to buying your CDs. I mean, it's hard to go someplace and buy CDs nowadays.
I just want to repeat the question before, for those of you who can't hear him. He said, what's your feeling about the state of music and the way we sell music these days, or don't sell music, with the downloading and being able to acquire music for free? It seems like it's even hard to even find a place to buy music these days. So, Lee, what do you think? What do you feel?
Well, what Marcus and I have learned, and anyone who's been doing music for quite a while, is that it does keep evolving, it keeps changing, and years ago it was vinyl records, and the record companies didn't want to let go of those factories that were producing vinyl, and then they came out with a CD, and people like Dave Gruisin's company, GRP, jumped on the CD, and then they came out strong with CDs. Now the car companies are not even putting CD players in the cars, so that part is kind of over, but companies like Spotify and Pandora and others are evolving, and a lot of us don't want to necessarily grab onto the technology. We want to grab onto what we know is comfortable. But as you said, it can be harder and harder to find CDs, but I think you just have to keep moving and grasping with, like, he's got a bunch of kids. I don't know, he's got it's 4, it seems like 10, but and they keep us fresh, because for them, this is just the way it is, and they don't want CDs, they're all on their streaming, on their downloads, and they keep what they want on their computer, and otherwise, they're just listening in the air. And so we got to keep making music and get it out there the way we get it out there, but it keeps evolving, and it's just like a doctor. You keep learning new tricks and the trade, and the technology keeps changing. Well, that's part of our business too.
This is you mentioned LPs to cassettes to CDs. Somebody just mentioned 8-tracks. Somebody just said 8-tracks. All right, I'm gonna let that go. But in terms of those kind of musical revolutions, this is a pretty intense one, because now free music is the norm, and that's a big thing to get used to. But as Lee said, the worst thing you can do is just sitting around waiting for things to return to the way they were. You know what I mean? You guys know it doesn't happen. You know what I mean?
Getting paid is a big deal.
Getting paid, but no, I'm on the board of directors at ASCAP. You guys familiar with ASCAP? It's a songwriters collection organization, and we're really working hard negotiating with people like Spotify and Pandora to get paid more fairly, because we were getting paid, but when you take a penny and you split it into like 100 parts, we were getting like 2 of those little parts, you know what I mean, per play. And so we're really working on getting paid more fairly, but we're not going back, trying to get them to go back to CDs or anything like that. It's like trying to order a car with a CD player in it now, right?
That's right.
No, trying to order a car with an 8-track player. Thank you for the question. 1 second. Yes.
Okay, so you mentioned Patrice Rushen a couple of times, and I love it. Could you just tell a little bit more about her?
She said Lee mentioned Patrice Rushen a couple of times, and she absolutely loved Patrice, and she just wanted Lee to talk a little bit more about Patrice.
Patrice is one of my closest friends, and she to this day we talk often, play together often, and she has had an amazing career with her records and her hit records, but then also doing TV, film scores, and writing, and then very heavily involved in education now. And she teaches at University of Southern California and heads up a whole pop division. They have a jazz division. She heads up the pop division, and she's just instrumental in making a great music department over there. And then she also teaches at the Berklee College of Music, and they float her between the two schools. And she still goes out and does her concerts occasionally. We just did something together in Sardinia, Italy last year, or earlier, last year. And so, just an amazing lady.
Elle parle français très bien aussi. Patrice speaks very good French too. She's like a Renaissance woman, don't you think?
That's right,
She's
absolutely.
great.
Yeah.
Okay, there was a question.
No, it was just when you're talking about, we're not going to go back to the way it was, but vinyl is coming back a little bit.
Yeah, she said, I said things aren't coming back, but vinyl is making a comeback, but it's making a niche comeback. You know, there are people who like the old school, the tactile thing of being able to have your music. But it's not like it was when Lee Ritenour was selling 1 million albums. You know what I mean? So,
Oh, you're just like dating me now.
any other questions? Yes, sir.
I just have a question for both of you guys. Who are some of the artists that you guys, if Lee needed someone to play guitar, who he would seek, and Marcus, who would you seek out as a bassist?
So if Lee's arm was in a sling,
Yeah, both of you guys are arms in the sling.
our arms are in a sling, but we need a guitarist and a bass player. Okay, Lee, you go first. Who's going to be the guitarist? Well, I have a way to MC. You just throw all the hard stuff over there.
I can answer that question pretty easily because I did an album in 2010 called Six String Theory. And I had 20 legendary guitar players on that record because I wanted to make an album. I had a dream to make an album with almost every guitar style on it. And in the earlier days, the record company said, "Are you crazy? You can't make a record with rock and jazz and classical and country all on the same record." And then starting around that era, whenever the record companies were looking for any kind of hook, that's a great idea. So I called, a bunch of my buddies, George Benson and Steve Lukather and John Schofield and Mike Stern and B.B. King and Slash and there's just a whole host of, and that's also what started my, I have a foundation called Six String Theory competition. It's a worldwide competition that we have a board and we support, and we have a competition every other year for piano, bass, and drums, and 6 styles of guitar like Six String Theory. So it ended up being kind of a major deal for me.
So how many guitar players in total did you have on that Six String Theory?
I think it was 20, yeah.
So were any of them, because you were obviously there when they were playing, did any of them surprise you in terms of how you thought they got their thing and how it turned out they actually got their thing?
Well, same as you, is that we're always in school.
Right.
So, whether it was Joe Bonamassa on blues or Slash playing rock or Steve Lukather or George Benson, or everyone had a different style of how they wanted their amp mic'd, if it was on acoustic guitar, so I was just checking out everybody, and I had the advantage of just seeing how everybody worked, And I remember there was this progressive rock guitar player, not a huge name, especially maybe for you guys. His name is Guthrie Govan, and very progressive rock, almost in the metal area, but not quite. And he had this tune called Fives, and it was like tremendous technique, and just he's kind of already the status where all the guitar players are checking this guy out, and he's in his, he's about 30 something. And so he comes and does a session with the great drummer Vinnie Colaiuta and Tal Wilkenfeld on bass, and they're doing this trio tune. And there's all sorts of people in the control room because all the guys from Concord Records are co-producing with me, and the Monster Cable folks are there, and there's just a slew of people in the control room. Joe Bonamassa walks in because he's going to come up next, and this is a great blues rock guitar player, and so he walks in. He's for such a big name and a guy who's very successful, he's kind of shy, and so he walks in. I don't know him very well, and he hears this from Guthrie Govan in the main studio, and he almost walks out, So, and I grab him. "Oh, come on in, Joe." So he comes in, and he listens to Guthrie's track, and it's just full of chops and rock and intense. And they finished the track. I said, "Come on in, Guthrie." Guthrie walks in and he said, "Meet Joe Bonamassa." And Joe says, "Oh my God, that was amazing." He said, "I don't think I'll play that many notes in my whole life." and then Guthrie said to him, he said, "But you play all the right ones."
There you go. For me, on bass, on bass. Remember the guy who used to sing like that, Larry Graham. I make Larry Graham play bass. Make my big brother play bass. And if he's not available, I'm gonna ask Stanley Clark.
Oh, yeah.
Play all my parts. And then there's a guy named Victor Wooten. You know Victor Wooten? Yeah. And we have another question right here in the back. Okay, he said, have you ever worked with Prince? And if you have, what are your thoughts on his guitar style?
Well, Prince was, just an amazing artist, and I'm old enough that I was working with an engineer on Captain Fingers named Tommy Vicari. I was 77, and Dave Gruisin and I were at Sound Labs, a studio in Hollywood, and Tommy Vicari said, "Hey, Lee, man, I'm doing a demo in this other room with this kid called Prince," and he hadn't gotten his deal yet. So I went in and met Prince. He was exactly like he was his whole life. He was shy, kind of introverted, but had this incredible confidence and ego, but didn't say 2 words to me, So that was my impression of Prince then. And then years later, at another studio, Sunset Sound, and I never worked with him, by the way, but I always admired him, and he was always kind of checking out everybody else. So I was recording in one room with my stuff at Sunset Sound. Prince was in another, and Toto was in the other. And so we all met out at the basketball court, and none of us could shoot any hoops.
Well, Charlie Murphy says Prince could shoot, but he wore his high heels during the game. Any more questions? I want to see if there are any questions on this side.
This side.
Where?
Back there.
Right here.
Okay, I can't see it. There you go. Hello.
Me?
Yes.
Oh, were either of your parents, did they have musical influences on you?
Big time, yeah. But my dad was my parents, my father's side came from Dearborn, Michigan. So he wanted to be a piano player, and he was always sneaking into Detroit to play with folks. But his parents did not want him to be a piano player. So they said, "Oh no, you can't do that. You cannot be a professional musician. You have to become an architect." And so that's what he did. And I could tell he was never happy doing that his whole life.
Really?
So when I wanted to play music, fortunately he was not pushy and became the
soccer dad.
The soccer dad, yeah. But he was very supportive, as was my mom. And fortunately, they moved out after World War II in '46 to California. So, and we preferred the sunshine.
Which is a great environment for not only sports, but for music too.
That's for sure. But then, on top of, just to really answer the question, but they loved music, both of them. So when I was, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, they were playing Errol Gardner on piano in the house, and Ray Charles, and Peggy Lee, and Lena Horne, people that I would later get to work with. And but all this, all this music was going through the house. The popular music of the day, but some very good stuff.
Right. For me, my dad was an organist and a piano player, so he played every Sunday in church. So that means there was choir rehearsal in our small Brooklyn apartment during the weekdays, and he was practicing. So music was there. When my dad wasn't practicing, my mom was playing Ray Charles records, and then the twist came out.
That's right.
And I could do the twist, so my mom would be playing the twist all the time, so she could let her little kid do the twist for her friends. And I wanted to be a baseball player, but at 10 the Jackson 5 came out, and I was like, whoa, no, that's what I want to do. I want to be like those. They look just like me. I never seen anybody on TV who looked just like me, so I was very influenced by them. But having my dad was great, because I would get like the Stevie Wonder songbook or the Jackson 5 songbook, and I couldn't figure out the notes, and my dad would sit down with me and go through it, show me all my harmony and stuff like that. So very supportive. In terms of being a professional musician, my dad really wanted me to finish college, because we had a cousin in the family, my dad's cousin, who was a jazz pianist. His name was Wynton Kelly.
Oh,
right?
famous.
Yeah, he played with Wes Montgomery for many years. And Wynton died early, you know what I mean? It was that real jazz life. So of course my dad was a little nervous, as was my mom, about becoming a musician. But I eventually convinced them that it was a new era and that the musicians of the day, of my time, were a little different. I never introduced them to David Sanborn. I just kept Dave on the side, you know, who I love and who's very important. But anyway, that was mine. We got time for one more question. Anybody? Okay. Okay.
Thank you. So, Lee, you toured with Fourplay for a number of years. You know, I've had a thought. I just want to ask you: is there any thought that you would replace Chuck Floyd back again? Yeah. I mean, he's such a big hole in that group. Any chance of that?
He said that Lee, as most of you probably know, was the original guitar player in Fourplay, and has Lee considered replacing Chuck Loeb, who recently passed away, on guitar with Fourplay again.
Well, there's always a possibility of something like that. Fourplay started in the 90s, and it started in a very unique way. I knew Bob James, and of course Harvey, and I worked close with Harvey Mason, and I was close with Nathan East as well. Who didn't know each other was Bob James and Nathan so much. And so Bob came to LA, and I think the album was called Grand Piano Suite or something like that, and he was doing his record. And he asked Harvey and I to play on it and recommend a bass player. So we recommended Nathan. We came to the studio, and that quartet was such a magical sound. You know, the most cool thing about a group sound, that when a group comes together and creates the individual parts and puts together an ensemble that has its own sound, it's amazing when it happens in music. And so we realized that, you know, Bob had his style, I had my style, Harvey definitely has his style, and Nate, and yet together it became the Fourplay sound. So for 3-4 albums we did that, and then it got complicated with recording contracts and whatnot, and so I had to bail, and so they went through Larry Carlton for a number of years, and then Chuck passed away. So the group's been kind of in limbo for the last couple of years, and as a matter of fact, you know, Bob called me and Harvey and Nate and said, what if we did a last album together? And there's a chance we might be thinking about that. Can't say for sure yet.
You know what? I think that's the way you should leave this interview, okay? With some optimism. Give it up, y'all, for Lee Ritenour.